Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we really tear into things, articles, research, all sorts of digging, to find those bits of knowledge, those kind of aha moments that honestly shift how you see things. And today, we're not just digging for facts, we're basically detonating some really ingrained, seriously romanticized ideas about history. Forget the shiny armor, the big imposing castles, all that courtly love stuff, and those tapestries telling tales of chivalry. That's what, well, it's a tiny gilded slice of the medieval world, a fantasy for damn few people, frankly. Our journey today, it doesn't kick off with a trumpet fanfare. It starts with something more like the distant clang of a church bell, cutting through this thick, damp, pre-dawn mist. You can almost smell it, can't you? That heavy, earthy scent of wood smoke, damp soil, and yeah, the very close kind of pungent warmth of livestock. Because let's be honest, they're probably sharing a damn hovel. This is
Yeah,
the real deal, the visceral, tough reality for maybe 85% of medieval Europe, a world about as far from a jousting tournament as you can possibly get.
absolutely. We're stepping past that carefully curated image, aren't we? Diving straight into the muddy, demanding, often pretty brutal existence of the medieval peasant. Their lives weren't shaped by stories of knights or the big plans of kings. No, they were molded, totally and utterly, by three massive, inescapable forces. First, the manorial system, not just economics, but the very crucible of their daily life. Second, the feudal hierarchy, fixing their place like a medieval siege engine. Powerful stuff. And finally, the relentless, completely unforgiving agricultural calendar. That was their master, their clock, their ultimate judge. This isn't just dry history. It's the deep story of millions of anonymous people whose sheer hard work built the world we know.
So, our mission here, it's ambitious. We're going to try and virtually live a year in the life of a typical peasant family. We're setting it on a fictional but meticulously researched estate. Let's call it Wakefield Manor. We'll follow Giles, a villein, that's a serf, legally tied body and soul to his patch of land. We'll meet his wife, Agnes, who sounds absolutely formidable. Her
Mhm.
skills were just as vital for survival as any man's in the fields, maybe even more so. And we'll watch their kids, young Robert and Eleanor, learning the harsh rhythms of labor that will define their whole lives, just like it did for their parents and grandparents. Their intimate, raw story is really the big story of whole civilization, told from the ground up, literally.
Exactly. Think of this deep dive as your shortcut. A truly unfiltered look at the bedrock of medieval civilization. We're not just listing dates and names, which, let's face it, can be dry as dust. We're pulling out the crucial insights, the raw, unvarnished truths that, once you grasp them, will genuinely reshape how you understand this whole era. You're about to get a handle on human endurance, the often brutal structures that kept societies going for centuries, and how it all impacted every single breath a peasant took.
Okay, so if Wakefield Manor was this little self contained universe, how did it actually connect to the bigger picture of medieval power? Where did people like Giles and Agnes really stand in the grand scheme of things? Most of us have this vague idea of the feudal system, right? But it's not often explained how utterly dependent the whole damn thing was on people like them. Let's start with how that power structure actually worked on the ground. At the very top, theoretically, you've got the king, ultimate owner of all land, supposedly. Though for someone like Giles, the king probably felt incredibly distant, almost like a myth. Then it cascades down through layers. You've got the powerful tenants in chief, these great lords holding huge chunks of land directly from the king. Then the mesne tenants, lesser lords, knights holding smaller parcels, fiefs. Basically subtenants in this complicated chain. And finally, at the massive sprawling base of this whole pyramid, the foundation everything rested on, the peasantry, millions of them.
Right. And what's truly fascinating here, and often kind of glossed over, is that this wasn't just politics. It was a fundamental, all-encompassing system of land ownership and obligation. It shaped everything. The deal was brutal in its simplicity. Land, in exchange for military service and loyalty. But look closer, and you see the whole structure, the seemingly rigid thing, completely dependent on the labor, the sheer physical work of that bottom layer. Imagine the sheer audacity, really, building an entire society on the backs of people who owned basically nothing, yet produced almost everything.
Wow. Yeah, when you put it like that.
And if you connect this to the chaos that came before, the fall of Rome, the Viking raids, Magyar invasions, all that instability, this feudal system, harsh as it was, actually offered a kind of grim stability. It was a stark trade-off for the common person. Give a huge chunk of your freedom, maybe all of it, for protection from starvation or just being killed, which weak central governments couldn't provide. A desperate bargain, but one that kept communities from just collapsing into anarchy.
That's a sobering thought, the sheer vulnerability. So, okay, the feudal pyramid gives us the big structure.
Mm.
Let's zoom right in now to the economic engine, the absolute heart of Giles and Agnes's world, the manor itself. Picture this self-contained universe. An
Hmm.
estate controlled by one lord, often thousands of acres. It had specific parts, right? The lord's domain, his personal lands, worked for him. Then the peasant plots, these individual strips of land held by families like Giles's, often scattered around in common fields, that open field system, and crucial common lands for grazing animals, gathering firewood, absolutely vital stuff, and the village itself all clustered together. Simple homes, the church, and critically, the lord's monopolies. The mill for grain, the bakehouse, maybe even a wine press. He controlled the essential infrastructure.
Yes, and the implications of that self-sufficiency are huge and kind of paradoxical. In an age of really limited trade, constant danger, fragmented power, the manor wasn't just an economic model, it was a survival mechanism. A sophisticated one, in its way. It created a predictable social order, even if it was a damn harsh one, sort of buffer against the chaos outside.
But did that self-sufficiency also mean things didn't change much, like stagnation?
That's the paradox, exactly. It could lead to stagnation. Without the push of external trade or lots of cultural exchange, generations might use the same tools, the same farming methods, because there wasn't that immediate pressure to innovate. Security from the outside, yes, but also a kind of intellectual and definitely economic isolation, which raises that big question. What did it mean for a peasant's own agency, their own choices, within such an all-encompassing system? Everything from their work to their daily bread was tied up in the manor's rules.
It really paints a picture of being hemmed in. But you said peasant wasn't one single thing. Within that massive group at the bottom, there were important differences, weren't there? Let's dig into that split between the free man and the serf. That sounds like a world of difference in terms of personal freedom.
Absolutely critical distinction. Peasant covers a whole spectrum. A free man, even if he was poor, had a level of autonomy a serf could only dream about. He might rent his land from the lord, sure, but he'd pay with cash or a fixed amount of produce. Crucially, he kept his personal liberty. He could, theoretically, leave the manor, marry off his kids without asking permission, and owed little or no direct labor service. He was a tenant, not property. His life was still hard as hell, don't get me wrong, but he owned himself.
Okay, so he had some breathing room, but then there's the serf, the villein like our Giles. What defined his situation?
Now we're diving into the really precarious world. It's important they weren't chattel slaves like in ancient Rome, bought and sold individually. But, and this is huge, they were bound to the land itself. An almost symbiotic relationship, but completely unequal. If the manor got sold, the serfs went with it, like part of the fixtures and fittings almost. Their status was usually hereditary, passed down. Or it could start with this. Chilling ceremony. An oath of bondage. A man, maybe desperate for protection or land, would literally place his head between the Lord's hands and swear an oath, binding him and his descendants to that manor forever.
God, that image, placing your head in his hands, that's a total surrender.
It speaks volumes, doesn't it? A complete surrender of personal will, a contract for life and beyond. Just fundamentally different from the freeman's position.
A truly iron grip. Was there any way out? Could a serf like Giles ever break free, or was that oath, that inherited status, totally inescapable?
That's a vital question, and it points to this underlying tension, this friction in the seemingly static manorial world. The pull of the growing towns and cities. These urban centers offered a different kind of life, and they created a crucial pressure valve. It was rare, definitely, but we do have records of serfs who got prosperous somehow, maybe smart farming, maybe luck, and managed to save enough to actually buy their freedom from the Lord.
By their freedom. Wow, that must have been incredibly difficult.
Oh, immensely. A lifelong, maybe generational dream for most. A real glimmer of hope. But there was another way, riskier but more direct. A widely recognized custom, sort of like a medieval loophole. It said if a serf could escape to a chartered town, one with specific legal freedoms, and stay there for a year and a day without being caught and dragged back by the Lord, he became, by custom, a free man.
A year and a day, that sounds like something out of a story.
It does. But it was real, a desperate gamble, obviously. But those who made it were powerful symbols. And that rule, subtly but surely, chipped away at the Lord's absolute control. It created ripples, showed there was an alternative, however dangerous, a testament to that drive for freedom, even against impossible odds.
Okay, so a tiny crack of light, but for most, they were stuck. Let's really unpack the sheer weight of obligations that defined Giles's life, because his family's survival, their actual food, depended on what little was left after all these dues were paid. Relentlessly extracted. This wasn't random, it was the system.
Exactly. And to really get the gravity, we need to break down each obligation, see its practical, often brutal impact. And here's a subtle point. These obligations didn't just take stuff, They shaped the peasants' whole mindset, taught them from birth their best efforts weren't primarily for themselves. That fosters a kind of fatalism, right? Makes individual ambition really hard to cultivate.
Right, it grinds you down mentally, too.
Yeah.
So what were the main ones?
Okay, first, labor service. The corvée.
Yeah.
Several days a week, usually 3, maybe more during harvest or planting a serf. Like Giles had to work on the Lord's own lands at domain. And here's the absolute killer. That work came first, before his own plot. Imagine watching your family's food potentially wither because you have to bring in the Lord's harvest. You're praying his crops do well because if his fail, everyone suffers, especially you.
That's a horrible choice to have to make. Your own field or the Lord's.
Gut-wrenching. Then, rent in kind. Not cash, but a big chunk of whatever you manage to grow on your little strip of land. Grain, vegetables, maybe a chicken or two handed straight over to the Lord. Often a fixed amount, so a good harvest didn't necessarily mean much more for you. On top of that, the church. Always the church. Demanding tithes. The decima. 1/10 of everything. Grain, milk, eggs, wool, honey, anything you produced. A constant tax on your basic survival framed as your spiritual duty.
1/10 of everything. That's huge when you have so little to start with.
It's massive. And then adding insult to injury. The banalités. The monopolies. Peasants were usually forbidden to grind their own grain or bake their own bread. Nope, you had to use the Lord's mill, his oven. And you paid a fee for it. Often a portion of your flour or a piece of the bread you just baked. Think of it like mandatory subscription services, but for basic survival. And totally non-negotiable. Another layer of control. Another cost draining your resources.
It keeps piling up. What else?
And finally, the feudal incidents. These felt particularly cruel, extracting value from life's big moments. The merchere, a fine paid to the Lord when a serf's daughter got married. Why? Because the Lord was losing her potential future labor, penalizing a family for a natural, happy event.
Paying a fine because your daughter gets married. That's twisted.
It feels that way, doesn't it? And even more chilling, the herit, an inheritance tax, basically. When a serf died, the Lord often had the right to seize the family's best animal, their best ox, their best cow, right when the grieving family needed it most to keep the farm going, right when the heir was trying to take over. A final, brutal reminder of who was really in charge, even in death, a claim on their legacy.
My God.
Just laying it all out like that. When you add it all up, the labor, the rent in kind, the tithes, the fees, the fines, it paints a desperate picture.
Yeah.
They must have needed a massive surplus just to pay their dues before even thinking about feeding themselves. Sounds like they were constantly on the edge. And that's the core of it. The profound precariousness. It wasn't just hard work, it was existing on a perpetual knife edge. A huge amount of effort went into just meeting obligations. So one bad harvest, a drought, a flood, animal disease could literally mean the difference between scraping by and agonizing starvation. Their lives were completely exposed to nature, yes, but also to the constant, relentless demands of the system. It's humbling, really, how fragile life was when so much was stacked against you and all you really owned was your own back-breaking labor.
All that incredible labor, plowing, harvesting, hauling manure, preserving food, it must have demanded immense physical energy. So what was actually fueling Giles and Agnes day after day? We'll get to their table soon, but first let's step back and look at the grand clock that ran their lives. Forget digital displays. Imagine a life where your schedule isn't set by minutes and hours, but by the sun's path, the feel of the soil, the relentless march of the seasons. For the medieval peasant, the year was this intricate, inescapable dance. Agricultural necessity fused with deep religious observance. Every task, every waking moment tied to this rhythm.
And that connection between the sacred and the profane, the everyday work, it wasn't just absolute. It was fundamental to how they saw the world. It blurred lines we tend to keep separate. Planting a field wasn't just practical. It was profoundly sacred. You'd have Christian prayers for a good harvest, sure, but probably mixed in with older, maybe pre-Christian, almost pagan charms for fertility. Praying to God, but maybe whispering to the earth spirits too, just covering all bases.
Hedging their bets.
Exactly. The calendar wasn't just a work schedule. It was a cultural and spiritual map. It gave meaning to the grueling toil, bound the community through shared rituals, shared hopes, shared fears. It made the hard labor feel like a sacred duty, not just survival.
Okay, so after the mad rush of autumn harvest and slaughter, winter arrives. But it wasn't downtime, was it? Not really rest.
Oh, definitely not rest in our sense. Maybe a change of pace, but the work just moved indoors, mostly.
Right. Picture Giles in his smoky, single-room cottage. It's cold. He's probably mending his wooden plow, sharpening his scythe blade, fixing the wattle fence around his little garden patch, his breath probably fogging up in the air, and Agnes, his wife, likely spending endless hours spinning wool into thread by the dim light of the hearth fire, a monotonous, constant task, just to make the rough cloth for their clothes.
And the absolute critical thing in winter was the stored food from autumn. This wasn't just good planning, it was life or death. Their diet would hit peak monotony now: dark, heavy bread, that thick pottage stew day after day, salted or smoked pork from the December slaughter, used sparingly. Threshing grain indoors, beating the kernels from the stalks was a constant winter chore. It provided food, but also vital warmth in those drafty huts.
Ah, the body heat from the work itself.
Exactly. And outside, when the ground wasn't freezing solid, they'd be hauling manure or marl, that lime-rich clay, out to the fields, spreading it, getting the soil ready for spring. Brutal, freezing work. But it showed long-term thinking, that desperate hope for the next harvest. And then, maybe late winter, the first lambs arrive. So fragile, a tiny, vulnerable promise of new life, of the cycle starting again, clinging on against the cold. Even in that bleakness, though, that grinding survival, there were moments of light, weren't there? Like Candlemas, February 2nd. That felt significant.
It really was. Candlemas marked the halfway point between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. Villagers brought candles to church to be blessed by the priest. They believed these blessed candles offered protection against sickness, against storms for the year ahead. It was a rare moment of collective light, communal hope, a sign that winter's grip was, finally, hopefully, starting to loosen. Hard for us to grasp how important these shared rituals were when daily life was so damn tough. They broke the monotony, offered meaning, connection. Then finally, the ground thaws, March, maybe early April, and the whole manor just explodes into activity. This is it. The crucial job. Plowing. And like you said, not a solo effort. Few peasants like Giles owned a full team of 8 oxen needed for those heavy plows, so it was communal. Pooling animals, pooling labor, coordinating everything.
Absolutely, a real team effort.
Picture Giles, maybe with young Robert helping, guiding that iron plowshare through the heavy soil, breaking it open for the first time since autumn. Eleanor maybe following behind, breaking up the big clods of earth. Then the frantic sowing, barley, oats, peas, beans, and constantly weeding the winter wheat that's now sprouting, green but vulnerable. Back-breaking stuff.
And for Agnes, spring meant the dairy season kicks off. Cows calving, pastures finally green after months of brown. Fresh milk, a true blessing after the winter diet. Her days would be filled with milking, turning butter, pressing cheese, vital food for the family, but also, if they were lucky, a tiny bit of surplus to maybe sell at market.
A little extra income.
A tiny bit, perhaps. And in June, the whole village turns out for sheep shearing. Another huge communal task, demanded everyone's help. Often followed by a bit of a party ale, food, a reward for the hard work. Intense labor, yes, but filled with the promise of new growth, the taste of fresh greens.
But spring wasn't all work, was it? There was that burst of exuberance. Tell us about Hocktide, that weird festival after Easter, and then the big one, May Day. These weren't just fun and games.
No, they were essential social release valves.
Yeah.
Hocktide, for example, second week after Easter. Women playfully capture men one day, demand a small ransom for the parish church. Roles reverse the next day.
A bit of gender-bending fun.
Exactly. A temporary sanctioned reversal. Harmless body fun. And May Day, May 1st, with roots deep in pre-Christian fertility rites. That was pure joy. Celebrating summer's definitive arrival. They'd put up a maypole decorated with ribbons, flowers. Young folks would spend the night a-maying in the woods, bringing back greenery at dawn to decorate houses. Dancing, games, and crucially, a sanctioned release. A temporary pause on the usual social rules. Courtship, a bit of wildness.
Letting off steam.
Absolutely vital. Followed quickly by Whitsun, 7th Sunday after Easter. Another excuse for church ales, selling beer to raise parish funds, plus lively folk plays, maybe Robin Hood, and that energetic Morris dancing. These festivals weren't just parties, they were social glue. Reinforced bonds, released tension, solidified identity against the backdrop of hardship.
Then comes summer, the absolute peak of physical effort, a desperate, exhausting race against time, and the notoriously unpredictable weather. First up, haymaking, late June, July.
Critically important.
Yeah, getting that winter fodder for the animals, a wet summer, a ruined hay harvest, that could be catastrophic. Force you to slaughter animals you needed come autumn. Less meat, less milk for winter. Just a damn precarious balance.
Totally precarious. And then the main event, the grain harvest, August. This was brutal, all-consuming. Work started before dawn, maybe 3 a.m. Continued relentlessly till dusk fell. Every single person, men, women, children old enough to carry water or bind a sheep, everyone was out in the fields. Everyone. Picture Giles swinging his scythe or sickle, muscles burning, cutting the wheat, the barley, Agnes and the kids following, gathering it, binding it into sheaves. This wasn't just work. This was next year's food supply for the entire village. secured in a few frantic, sweltering weeks under a punishing sun. The spiritual high point here was Lammas Day, Loaf Mass, August 1st. The first cut sheaf of wheat was brought to church, blessed, a powerful symbol of gratitude, a plea for the harvest to continue well, marked the real start, spiritually.
Sounds absolutely grueling, a true test of endurance. And then wrapping up this intense season, and really the whole farming year, was Michaelmas, September 29th. More than just another Saint's Day, right?
Oh, much more. Michael Rummus was a major legal and social marker, tied the sacred and the practical together very neatly. It wasn't just a holiday, it was the traditional day for settling accounts, paying rents to the Lord, renegotiating land deals, and holding hiring fairs where laborers looked for work for the next year. It formally closed the agricultural year, bound economic and spiritual life together, allowed everyone a moment to kind of take stock before the lean, cold months set in, a crucial turning point from harvest back to preparation.
So the main grain harvest is in. The frantic pace eases off a bit, but the work doesn't stop. Not by a long shot.
Never stops, just changes focus.
Right. Fields plowed again, ready for sowing winter grains, wheat, rye. They'd lie dormant over winter, sprout in spring. Late crops like apples harvested, maybe pressed into cider. And that fascinating detail, driving pigs into the Lord's woods for pannage, the right to let them fatten up on acorns, beech nuts. Imagine that scene. The whole village's pig, squealing and snuffling, gorging in the forest, turning nature's free bounty into vital winter meat.
A noisy, crucial part of autumn. And November, December were dominated by the next vital step, slaughtering surplus livestock. Any animal you couldn't realistically feed through the hard winter had to be cold. Then the painstaking work of preserving the meat, salting, smoking, drying. This is how you got protein through the coldest months. Kept deficiency diseases at bay, staved off starvation. It was a period of relative hard-won abundance. A brief reward for the year's hellish labor. The turn to the dark half of the year was marked too. All Hallows Eve, All Saints' Day, November 1st. Deep pagan roots there, honoring the dead. Often big bonfires trying to ward off evil spirits, push back the darkness of winter and death itself.
And then finally, the big exhale. The collective sigh of relief across the village. The 12 days of Christmas. This was it, wasn't it? The only real extended break in the entire peasant calendar. A couple of weeks off, granted by the Lord.
Absolutely vital. Utterly essential for morale, for sanity. Imagine a life of almost constant toil. This was their time. Time for feasting on that fresh proke, drinking lots of ale, often specially brewed, playing rough games, like early brutal versions of football between villages. Just real communal celebration.
Letting loose properly for once.
A deep breath. A joyous, maybe slightly chaotic escape before the whole relentless cycle cranked up again in January. These periods of licensed fun weren't just entertainment. They were psychological pressure valves, crucial for keeping the community spirit alive in a world that demanded absolutely everything you had.
This whole calendar, it just underscores this brutal truth, doesn't it? Every single month had its own demanding tasks, a blend of farming necessity and spiritual practice, creating this predictable, incredibly demanding rhythm, toil, punctuated by rare but profound communal joy, no escaping it. It was the blueprint for their entire existence.
Okay, let's step inside one of these peasant cottages.
Yeah.
You really need to reset your expectations here. Forget any modern idea of comfort or privacy. This wasn't quaint, it was stark.
Yeah.
Multi-purpose, a fragile little fortress against a hostile world. Survival drove every single design choice.
Exactly. Describe the construction and you start to get it. Simple timber frame, walls of wattle and daub, woven sticks packed with mud, clay, straw, and animal dung.
Oh, yeah.
Basically a very solid organic plaster.
Right in the walls.
Okay.
Keeps the weather out.
Mhm.
And the roof, thick thatch. Great insulation, kept some warmth in, but also notoriously full of vermin, mice, rats, insects, spiders, living right above your head.
Lovely. Cozy.
Inside, one, maybe two small rooms if you were lucky. Perpetually dim, floors just beaten earth, often covered with straw that wasn't changed very often. Imagine the smell, the pests breeding in there. No glass windows, obviously, just small openings, maybe with wooden shutters. So it was always dim, drafty, incredibly enclosed. Try doing any fine work in that kind of light.
And the heart of this home, the hearth. Central fire, sole source of heat, light, cooking. But the detail that always gets me. No chimney. I keep picturing medieval kitchens with big fireplaces, but no chimney. How did they live with that? Day in, day out.
It's hard to wrap your head around, isn't it? It meant acrid, eye-watering smoke constantly filled the room. It would just seep out through a hole in the roof or under the eaves. Imagine breathing that every single day. That perpetual haze, the sting in your eyes, everything coated in soot. It was, well, hellish by our standards. Furniture was brutally basic. Rough trestle tables you could take down, stools, benches, a wooden chest for valuables maybe doubling as a seat, beds, straw-filled sacks on the floor, often shared by the whole family, maybe even
Don't say it. The animals.
the animals. What truly blows your mind, what makes you feel their world, is the cohabitation. Livestock inside the house. Chickens underfoot, maybe a pig in the corner, even a cow sharing the roof in winter.
A cow. Inside. Why? Just why?
Pure pragmatism, not choice.
Yeah.
Bringing animals inside, especially in winter, protected them. From theft, a pig was a huge asset, and from predators. And crucially, their body heat helped warm the place. Every little bit counted. The peasant home wasn't just shelter. It was this physical manifestation of their constant, desperate negotiation between hardship and sheer bloody survival. Every sound, every smell, every smoky corner told that story, doing whatever the hell it took to get by.
Right, let's talk fuel. What powered all this relentless labor? The peasant diet. It sounds monotonous, heavy on starch, and designed for one purpose: calories. Forget fancy food. This was about raw energy for punishing physical work. Day after day.
Absolutely, the cornerstone of every meal, every day. Bread. And not the nice white bread the Lords ate, that symbol of status. No, this was heavy, coarse loaves. Rye, barley, or a mix of cheaper grains, maslin, maybe oats, peas ground in, dense, dark, often gritty. It was probably 70–80% of their calorie intake,
It's just bread, bread, bread.
pretty much. The other daily staple, pottage, that thick, slow-cooked stew. Whatever vegetables were around peas, beans, cabbage, onions from their garden plot, thickened with oats or barley, maybe flavored with herbs they gathered. The original set it and forget its meal. Simmering on the hearth all day while they were out working. Efficient, yes. Exciting, definitely not. Just endless variations on gruel, really.
And this diet directly reflected their place in society, didn't it? Even if Giles grew good wheat, most went to the Lord as rent. They ate the cheap stuff.
Precisely. And meat. Big restrictions. The forests might be full of deer, boar, but hunting, that was strictly for nobles. Poaching meant severe punishment, blinding, even death. Though desperate people certainly took the risk, meat was a luxury, eaten maybe on big feast days like Christmas or after the autumn slaughter when there was a temporary glut of salted pork or mutton. Most of the year, protein came from Agnes's cheese and butter, eggs from their hens, maybe fish if they lived near a river and had fishing rights.
And the drink. The universal lubricant, ale.
Ah, liquid bread. More than just a drink, a vital source of calories, maybe 1,000, 2,000 calories a day for a hardworking man. And, critically, safer than water from streams or wells that could easily be contaminated. Brewing killed the germs.
Everyone drank it, even kids.
Yes, usually small ale, lower alcohol content for children, but everyone drank it. Every household brewed its own, typically the women like Agnes. Absolutely indispensable. So, the peasant's table. A constant physical reminder of their status, defined not by choice, but by what was left after all the damn obligations were met. A testament to endurance, not gastronomy. Meals weren't about pleasure. They were purely about survival.
Life back then, that sounds like a physical minefield. Accidents in the fields, a simple cut turning septic, and disease, always looming. How did they even think about health? It seems like a mix of practical stuff and something else entirely.
It was a complex blend, definitely. And what's surprising, pushing back against the image of total filth, is evidence of some practical hygiene. People generally washed hands and face daily. Cleaning teeth with a frayed twig and wool cloth was common. Linen undergarments were worn and washed more often than outer wool clothes because linen could be boiled clean. So there was some awareness, some effort to stay clean personally.
That's fascinating. A bit cleaner than we might think. But the overall environment was still pretty grim, right?
Oh, profoundly unsanitary by our standards. Human and animal waste often ended up in cesspits near wells or just thrown in the street. Contaminated water sources were a huge problem. Those straw floors and straw beds, teeming with lice, fleas, parasites, it created this weird paradox. A peasant might wash his hands, but his whole worldview, heavily shaped by the church, taught that illness wasn't from germs they didn't know about germs, but was divine punishment, God's wrath for sin.
So a stomach bug wasn't bad water. It was, you did something wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or maybe God was testing you. It was seen through a moral, spiritual lens, not a biological one. A constant negotiation between common sense observation and this deeply ingrained fatalistic faith.
So when sickness inevitably hit, a child gets a fever, Giles breaks a leg, Agnes gets ill, how did they actually cope? What were their options?
They used a multi-pronged approach, really, born of necessity. First, they'd likely turn to the local wise woman or village herbalist. These women had vast and valuable knowledge of plants and remedies passed down through generations, often surprisingly effective for common problems. But at the same time, maybe even more importantly, they'd pursue religious cures. intense prayer, acts of penance fasting, self-flagellation sometimes, or undertaking a difficult pilgrimage to a saint shrine known for healing. St. James of Compostela, maybe, or local shrines, formal university-trained physicians, with their theories about the four humors blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, forget it. Completely inaccessible, ridiculously expensive for peasants, so their health was managed through this mix, practical folk wisdom, herbalism, and deep fatalistic faith. Ultimately, you placed your well-being, your life in God's hands, because really, what other choice did you have? Life and death felt very close, hanging by a thread.
Right, let's talk family. And again, we need to ditch the modern romantic view. The medieval peasant household wasn't primarily about emotions. It was a stark, tightly knit economic unit, geared entirely for survival. Love existed, sure, but the economic reality drove everything.
It started with a brutal truth. Incredibly high infant mortality. Maybe up to half of all children didn't make it through their first year. A constant background grief families just had to live with. But those who did survive, they weren't treated like fragile kids to be coddled. They were seen as miniature adults, put to work as soon as they were physically capable, often by age 5 or 6. Childhood, as we know it, a protected time for play, education, didn't exist.
So little Robert would be out learning to handle animals, maybe scaring birds off the crops, and Eleanor learning from Agnes.
Exactly. Eleanor would learn all the domestic stuff, gardening, spinning, weaving, helping with poultry, maybe milking from Agnes. Robert would learn the field work, animal husbandry from Giles. Every pair of hands was essential. A mouth that ate also had to contribute. No room for passengers.
And Agnes, the peasant wife. Her role sounds absolutely relentless. Not just managing the home, but a real economic partner.
Oh, an economic powerhouse. Her contribution was staggering, often overlooked. Yes, she worked alongside Giles in the fields at peak times harvest, planting. But she also had sole responsibility for a huge range of other vital tasks. Tending the garden plot crucial vegetables, caring for chickens, milking the cow, making cheese, butter, key sources of fat and protein, brewing the family's ale, essential calories, maybe a bit to sell, spinning wool, weaving cloth, preparing every meal, raising the kids, teaching them their roles. Her workload was immense, dawn till long after dark, arguably as vital, if not more vital sometimes, than her husband's field work.
So marriage itself wasn't really about finding your soulmate then, more like a business partnership.
Primarily, yes. A practical arrangement for economic partnership, creating a viable unit to work the land and survive. Love might develop, hopefully, but it wasn't the starting point. For serfs like Giles, getting married often needed the Lord's permission. And, you guessed it, usually involved paying a fee that Merchef fine, because her labor potentially belonged to the Lord.
Right, it affected his workforce.
Exactly. In this world, every mouth needed a pair of working hands attached. That economic imperative was the absolute core organizing principle of peasant family life, shaped everything. A partnership of sheer necessity, bonded by shared labor and the constant struggle to survive.
Okay, the Lord was the ultimate boss. But day-to-day village life, disputes, rules, there was actually a local system, wasn't there? The manor court. Was this just the Lord laying down the law, or did peasants have any real say?
That's a great question, and it pushes back against seeing peasants as totally powerless victims. The manor court, usually held every few weeks, presided over by the Lord's steward. It was more than just the Lord's mouthpiece. Yes, it recorded land transfers, collected fines, enforced his rights. But, and this is key, it was also a vital forum for the peasants themselves. And they used it a lot.
They sued each other.
Absolutely. The court records are amazing for this. You see peasants bringing cases against neighbors all the time. Your pig got into my garden. You didn't pay me back for that seed corn. You didn't show up for your share of communal plowing. Stuff like that. It also enforced the village's own farming bylaws essential for managing those open fields. When to plow, when animals could graze the stubble. Communal agreements.
So who actually decided these cases? Just the steward?
Often, no. Judgments were frequently made by a jury of their peers. Other tenants from the manor who knew the local situation, the personalities, the custom of the manor, the unwritten rules, they could apply justice with real local understanding. Plus, twice a year, there was a special session, the court leet. All men over 12 had to attend for the view of frank pledge, swore an oath to uphold the king's peace, report crimes. It shows a surprising degree of legal awareness and real agency within a system that looks purely top-down. They were active participants in managing their own local order, which was crucial for keeping the peace in a close-knit, sometimes fractious community.
Despite all the hardship, the endless work, the threat of hunger, life wasn't just gray drudgery, was it? It was broken up by these bursts of vibrant communal celebration, moments for the village to breathe, connect, just Be human. How important were these times?
Absolutely essential. Think of them as social safety valves in a really rigid, demanding world. They let off steam, reinforced community bonds that got strained by daily life, and often had a practical side too, like raising money for the church through those church ales, community beer festivals, basically. It was this rich mix of Christian holidays interwoven with much older, deep-rooted folk traditions, some definitely pre-Christian, a unique cultural blend. These weren't just optional parties, they were cultural anchors, vital for psychological health and keeping the community together.
What kind of entertainment would you see?
Oh, lively stuff. Boisterous Morris dancing, robust folk plays, often about figures like Robin Hood, sticking it to the man, championing the little guy, parades of mummers, costumed villagers performing short plays or dances, often going door to door for food and drink, added a real theatrical, sometimes funny element. And crucially, some festivals allowed for temporary, controlled social inversion, turning the world upside down for a bit.
Like,
Think of the wild chaos of carnival just before Lent. Peasants might openly mock lords, break rules, just general licensed mayhem for a few days, or hawk tide with that playful gender role swap we talked about. These moments of shared joy, the big bonfires on Midsummer's Eve, those rough village football games at Christmas, dancing around the Maypole in spring, they were the essential glue holding the community together. They affirmed shared identity, maybe settled rivalries through games instead of fights, and provided that collective spirit, that psychological resilience needed to face the next damn season of hardship. Profound moments of human connection, vital for the community's very soul. Hashtag tag tag outro.
so we've walked a year in Giles and Agnes's muddy boots. We've seen that the medieval peasant's life was, without a doubt, defined by constraint. Tethered to the Lord, the church, the seasons, just relentless physical work in close, often unsanitary conditions. Always shadowed by vulnerability, bad weather, war, disease. A small world, their future largely mapped out in the same fields their ancestors worked.
But, and this is so important, just seeing it as misery misses the point. It misses the staggering resilience, the ingenuity, the complex world they built despite the constraints. Beneath that rigid system, they created a rich folk culture, a working local justice system, strong communal bonds that ensured survival. They weren't passive victims. They were active agents in their own world, pragmatic survivors, finding meaning, forging connections, even finding real joy amidst the toil. They're the silent majority, whose anonymous, unrelenting labor literally built the foundations of Western civilization. Their story, rarely told in big histories, is etched into the landscape of Europe, profoundly shaped the world we live in.
So after diving into this raw, unvarnished reality, thinking about those unseen chains, those seasonal demands, maybe consider this. How many unseen chains, economic, social, might still subtly bind us today, echoing that manorial system in ways we don't always recognize? What systems do we navigate, maybe without even thinking about it, that demand our time, shape our choices, control our sustenance in patterns that deep down maybe aren't so different from the fields of Wakefield Manor?
It's exactly. This deep dive isn't just history class. It's a mirror, reflecting that timeless human struggle for autonomy, security, connection, whatever the era. It invites you, really, to look at the deep foundations of society, then and now, and to question how much has truly changed under the surface. Go look at your own world with fresh eyes. See if you can spot those echoes of the furrow.